You can take it away.
Okay, welcome everybody to the partial double Octos. We have Team Hong Kong in proposition and we have Team Croatia White in op. Teams, I'm going to get you to go around and introduce yourselves in a moment, just so we can do an audio check. If you can also specify if you prefer POIs verbally or audibly, that would be helpful. I, throughout the debate, are going to do the timings in the chat if that's convenient for you guys, but I can also make a sound as well. But I know that a lot of teams have found that having audio sort of time signals quite distracting. So I've been doing it in the chat, but please do let me know if you prefer me to do something else. So firstly, proposition, if you can introduce yourselves, first prop.
First proposition, my name is Markandeya. Second proposition is Jenna. She's also going to be doing reply. And third prop is Davis.
Perfect, thank you very much. And opposition.
My name is Lucia. I'm the first of opposition. Stella is the second speaker. Jagoda will be the second speaker, and Stella here will be the third speaker, and Jagoda will be doing the reply.
Great, thank you very much. Let's flick my camera on for a moment so that you can see what I look like. I'm Beth Warburton. I'll be judging you. To avoid any issues with naming pronouns, I'll be referring to people as the speaker for the most part, and you can refer to me as chair, chairperson, whatever. That's absolutely fine. I don't want to get any sort of time lag or Wi-Fi issues with this, so I may turn my camera off when you're actually speaking, just so that there's no interruptions there, especially since we're live streaming this one. Speakers, if you can make sure that you have your camera on when you're speaking at any point, either delivering POIs or obviously when you're giving your substantive speeches, that'd be great. But if you find that you have any issues that require you to turn your camera off at any other times, that's absolutely fine. Are you all happy with time signals in the chat?
Yeah.
Great, perfect. Okay, so let me just get the chat up, 1 second. So we have, this house prefers government as opposed to privatised exploration of space as the motion. I'm just going to get my stopwatch up. I will obviously be timing as well, but you are all advised to do your own timing in addition. And if we do encounter any problems, I will make sure that I stop the clock and that it's resumed when you return to being able to speak. So I'm just going to get ready and apologies. The joys of technology, just having all the different parts operating at the same time, and then great. Okay, we're ready to go. I'd like to invite the first speaker for the proposition to open this debate. I will start timing when you're ready.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool. In the world today, we're seeing rapidly increasing rates of space exploration. Multi-billionaires like Elon Musk, Richard Branson, and Jeff Bezos are operating huge private companies. Blue Origin, SpaceX, and Virgin Galactic. All of these companies are dedicated to exploring the far reaches of space and places where we've never gone before, and bringing back vital rare earth minerals and space discoveries, which are supposedly in the best interest of society. However, we believe that these private companies have one main incentive in mind when it comes to space exploration. Like any other rational firm, these companies have the incentive to profit maximize. To this extent, we believe that the continuation of space exploration by private companies is likely to hinder research, create detrimental long-run impacts, and is damaging to society at large. Proposition rejects the notion that privatized space exploration is beneficial over government-run exploration. At its core, this debate is very simple. It's about setting us up for a good future. recognize that it is increasingly likely that our future as a human species is going to be directly interlinked to space. So right now, we need to be making good decisions so we don't have to reverse these decisions in the long run, because it's very difficult to do this. It often involves huge amounts of red tape, and oftentimes reversing decisions down the line, 30, 40 years down the line, is going to be extremely difficult. So insofar as we're able to prove to you that government-run space exploration can do this better than private space exploration, we win this debate. I'm going to forward two arguments in my speech today. First, why the privatization of space exploration is detrimental in the long run, and why governmental space exploration can do this to a far better extent. And secondly, why this is detrimental to society if we oppose this motion. My second speaker, Jenna, is going to be talking about data and research and how you're more likely to hinder that when you have complete private control over space exploration. But before that, just two main points of setup. What do we mean by government exploration of space? We're essentially saying that all space exploration is going to be run by specifically government-run branches. What does this look like? This looks like organizations like the National Aeronautic Space Administration in the United States, the Indian Space and Aeronautical Society in India, for example. So all discoveries from space are going to be, from all discoveries made through space exploration by governments, all discoveries made by space exploration are going to be specifically handled and specifically obtained by governmental institutions. Private exploration is the exact contrast of this, where we're specifically looking at companies like SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, etc., etc. Okay, moving on to my first constructive. One, why the privatization of space exploration is fundamentally detrimental in the long run. The premise of this argument is very simple. Recognize that private companies have an inherent profit-maximizing incentive. What does this mean? This means that when any private company undertakes a venture, whether it's on Earth, whether it's in space, their main goal from it is to be able to extract a maximal amount of revenue from this venture. We think this is especially true for companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, who invest huge amounts of money into space exploration. For this reason, it's highly likely they want to get the highest possible output in the lowest amount of time, right? So all of their revenues from space exploration need to be able to outweigh their costs. I think both sides can also concede that space exploration is also something which is inherently extremely uncertain, because space is an extremely vast area with a lot of undiscovered stuff that no man has ever set foot on. So space exploration for any private corporation is an extremely risky venture because it's expensive, and it's also difficult to forecast any possible gain from said exploration. The question therefore is, how does privatization mean that space exploration is fundamentally detrimental in the long run? We give you two main mechanisms for this. Our first mechanism, basically on a very intuitive level, is that we argue and we put forward the notion that governments must explore space. Why is this the case? It's for the same reason that we don't let private companies have the sole ownership of vital natural resources in the status quo, right? What exactly do these natural resources look like? It looks like water, it looks like oil. We don't think private companies should be able to have complete access to the space discoveries from exploration in the same way that they don't have access to vital resources in the status quo, like oil and like water. Why should they not be able to do this? This is because there is great potential for private companies to mess things up for the rest of society when they have access to extremely important resources. For example, if we grant private companies full ownership of water, full ownership of oil, they can significantly alter the prices for their own benefit, which actively harms society. We think the same thing can be applicable to space when private companies discover things like rare earth minerals, for example. Governments, on the other hand, are specifically accountable towards society. This means that they are more likely to ensure public good when obtaining any sort of discovery. So, as a direct consequence of this, if we enable private companies to explore space, we're not going to get any sort of benefit. Why? Due to the uncertainty of space and the profit-maxing incentives of companies, anything that is found from private space exploration is likely to be kept by private companies because that is exclusively profitable for that specific space company. So, if these companies are forced to turn over any sort of discoveries for things like research purposes from universities or institutions or for the public good, and the entire economic incentive of private companies goes down the drain. So what happens if they handle discoveries, I'll take you in a second, they make through space exploration? It's unlikely that these companies or any other company in the future is going to intend to explore space because there is no sort of return for them, because all discoveries have to be given towards governments or for the benefit of society. There's no economic gain for them whatsoever. So we don't get much space exploration in the long run under side opposition. What happens if they don't hand over their discoveries in the alternative scenario? Then it costs much more for society and the public to access these discoveries because of the profit maximizing nature of these firms. They're likely to charge extremely high costs for rare earth minerals for the public to access for anything like research. The impact of this is that in the long run, this is going to be highly detrimental to society, highly detrimental to space exploration. It's something we do not stand for. I'll take a POI before moving on to my second argument.
Well, SpaceX hasn't patented a single of their discoveries. NASA hides discoveries so other countries cannot use them for military, etc. How do you explain that?
Okay, first of all, we think that right now SpaceX hasn't made that many discoveries in the first place, so it's very difficult for them to patent stuff which they haven't even found. But secondly, we will argue that even if they do find things in the long run, even if they don't patent it, it's highly likely that they exploit that resource for their own personal profit maximizing incentives. I already talked about this. I don't really understand what the impact of that POI is. Okay, second argument, the inequitable division of resources and discoveries when we have privatized space exploration. The premise of this argument is if our future is becoming increasingly tied to space, then we want this future to be as equitable as possible. We want to ensure that society as a whole can benefit from the equitable division of space discoveries. The question is, why is this less likely to happen when you have private companies? The mechanism here is simple. Let's say you have two private competing space companies. These two companies have the same goal of getting something from space first. This is for the same reason I explained to you in my last argument, right? What does this mean? When you get one company discovering, for example, a very rare space good, like a rare earth mineral, for example, and that company is probably going to keep it for their own profitable gain without sharing any sort of research with another company, which is, again, extremely detrimental. Why do we think governments will be able to share any sort of research? Because governments have the ability to negotiate with each other and are far more likely to do this for a multitude of reasons, like socio-geopolitical reasons, etc., etc. So if one country finds an extremely interesting space resource, they're likely to trade with other countries, which benefit society as a whole. For these reasons, it's very, very clear that governments are far better actors in terms of space exploration.
Great, thank you very much to the speaker. Sorry, can you all hear me okay? It's a slight lag there, great. I'm just going to adjust something. I had a slight issue there where the messages I was trying to send were seemingly only going to the host of the meeting. Could anybody see the timings?
No, the timings didn't show up in the chat.
Apologies, I did try and change it to everyone and it absolutely won't let me. It'll only let me send it to the host of the meeting, which is strange. So apologies if that was in any way disruptive to the first speaker. You timed perfectly well. But going forward, I will have to make an audio time signal if that's okay. I'll just do a clap, okay? Right. Thank you very much to the speaker for opening the debate. Now we move to the first speaker from the opposition bench to open the case for Croatia White.
Just a second.
No problem.
I think you're on mute.
She is holding the speech. I'm just inviting.
I'm going to start like seconds. Yes, just to open this. Okay. Just my stopwatch. Okay, can I start?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
My POIs you can do visual. It's easier for me. Okay, thank you. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Oh, sorry, just okay. So it's a side of opposition. We here believe how we should give this this exploration of space to privatized companies and to leave the space for citizens to decide if we want the government to interfere in these situations. So we prefer privatized, but we also want to tell you that we do have both. In my speech, you will hear a couple of things. First, we'll be talking about this profit side of proposition mentioned. Their first argument about like how this is risky and expensive, I will prove you how that is the exact reason why private companies should do this. And I will be bringing you our stance and our two arguments. First about the principle and how we think this is principally not okay for governments to interfere in this problems, and secondly the practical parts about how we believe how companies will be more efficient in this job. Okay, so moving on to the rebuttal on their case. So first, let's look at the thing that they started proposition needs to prove to us. First, they told us how if they prove to us how the government does this better, they win this debate. We believe how if you prove that you with that need to prove to us how harmful this privatized why is this privatized companies exploring this? Why is this harmful? Because you're only proving that government will do this better, which will explain why do it in the right way, isn't enough for us to continue this debate. We believe how if we prove to you that these companies will collaborate with the state in some kinds of ways and will be able to proceed and to be more successful in these problems, we win this debate. So moving on to your first argument, which is talking about how these problems of exploring the space is risky, is expensive. Yes, side of proposition, we really agree that it is risky and expensive. So this is why we believe that the state has limited resources and that it can't handle this on its own, which I will be more talking about in our arguments. We believe how also on your points about how people are telling what they have found in their researchers and things like that. We believe how NASA and countries aren't cooperative in this kind of things. They aren't telling each other what they have, what they discovered. But we believe how privatized Elon Musk and people like this will share their research with the whole world. Also, we believe how this exact profit oriented about these private companies is the thing that will motivate them to have incentive to invest this money to better their work, just so they can show people that they can do this, just so they can earn that profit. We believe how that profit is a great motivation to keep on their business, to keep on their incentive and good work in this. We believe how your arguments about how it's better for government to exploit this in a way, I proved you how we believe that government doesn't have enough resources to handle handling people's rights parallelly with the exploring the whole space. Doesn't have enough resources to support these kind of things. We believe how the argument about how this is better for society, we believe how these companies won't be keeping this research to themselves. We believe how they will share it towards other people. They will share it so they can get profit, so they can benefit from that, because that is an incentive of the private company. We believe how we are going to prove to you in our stance. So I shall move on. So we are telling you that we are representing public and private companies, and we believe how the focus must be on private companies. I will prove to you later that. So we believe that private companies can collaborate with public ones, and the private companies bringing that we will prove to you how they will do this job successfully. So now, first, like the principle. Why do we think that isn't justified with the principle? So we believe how people in the state, so the state gets the money from the taxes from the people, from their citizens, and we believe that this money is supposed to be used for instant help to help their citizens. And so, for example, like healthcare, if you break a leg, you get instant MRI and things like that. We believe like spending these taxes on exploring the space and things like that, they won't be able to focus much on both, or focus on, if they focus, even if they focus only on protecting their citizens, they won't be having much of a clear picture of the space thing. So we believe how the state can balance these things. It needs to be in principle, it needs to be focused on their citizens, because this money is coming from them. So why do we think that privatized exploration is more in principle in this debate? Because people who are in private companies are getting that money from the citizens. People are getting that money, and they have an incentive to make the research even better with this money. And we believe how people never gave them the right to use this money to prioritize the space before them on the state. We believe how private companies are using that other money that isn't coming from people, and it will better and be better and successful in these missions. We believe how this On their side of the house, we have people who are mad at the state because it hasn't prioritized them. It has prioritized space researchers, and it didn't give private people to get on their own job and to get them space to make better improvements and successful research than the state. We believe how people will be mad at the state at the same moment, and we believe how on our side of the house people will be happy with the state because it will be doing their job and prioritizing their citizens, because their money should be used only on them and not on some that research, because we believe how it needs to think and prioritize these people. Now on the efficiency and how we believe that opposing this motion because private companies are the ones to be more efficient. Why? Because first, let's talk about bureaucracy. We believe how governments have to go through numerous votings, the laws and decisions and budgets. They have to be approved on numerous levels of government. It's timely process of every decision that takes ages to make. We believe how the focus, the government has lack of focus, and they have issues with time, money, and people tend to need in order to do these huge plans and to make them true. So the only time we see government investing was the Cold War, when they did only because they wanted to be better than other countries. But now we see people are no longer space crazed, rather than care about healthcare, education, etc. We believe their focus is no longer on space, and we believe how government also doesn't cooperate with another countries, as I already said. So people who will be sent are right now, humanity isn't battling with overcrowding. We believe that water and food supplies are short, and we don't know how much longer this planet will be sufficient for us. So once government get to decide to whom to take the space to, or to march to colonize and see them choosing the perfect examples of people, they will be discriminate based on gender, race, and things like that. We, when doing that, they won't be caring about the true professionals and the merit of the people, rather than the things like ethically perfect or not. We believe how private companies don't have the bureaucracy. Once Elon Musk decides to make a space rover, they can easily do it, because its money is being put only there. Their focus is only on this job and only on the space. In terms of money, private companies are specialized for space exploration, and it's only their focus there. We believe how in terms of cooperation on our side of the house, private companies cooperate with public, and government wants, meaning that they complement each other, and private companies take up projects that government didn't have any money to build them in the first place. We believe how the great impact of this is that since private companies have the time, have the money, have the focus to help people, they should be the only ones who get to do this, the only ones who will make this right. And this is why I've never been more incredibly proud to propose.
Great. Do give me one moment? Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much to the opening speaker for the opposition bench. We now return to Team Hong Kong and their second speaker to continue their case.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And verbal POIs are preferred. As we enter the final frontier, as it becomes clear that our future is going to be inexplicably tied to space, to the resources it can give us, to the space it can give us, to the knowledge it can give us, it is more important than ever that we are going to set good ground rules for how we are going to conduct ourselves there. A lot of what Mark told you, which went largely unresponded to, was exactly about that. That even though right now it seems like private companies are flashy, they might be, as they say, faster, and we'll explain why that's not the case. But even if they are faster, even if there is less bureaucratic mess for them to deal with, we think that bureaucratic mess is actually important. That bureaucratic mess is stability, it means regulation, it means we are going to have a better future for our children. Before getting into substantive today on why we think data is actually going to be worse on their side of the house, note firstly that this is going to clash a lot with their material about how private companies are going to be more collaborative and they're going to share data more. Let's first take a look at rebuttal. Their first argument then was on this idea of the principle that governments should not be spending their money on things that don't immediately help the public good. Why is this the case? Firstly, because we think that governments should be able to spend their money so long as their citizens are okay with it. Insofar as no one is voting is on whether or not what NASA's budget is going to be, whether it's going to be $5 billion or $7 billion, that has never been a voting issue because citizens are perfectly okay with the status quo where NASA does get funding. And we think as long as people are okay with it, as long as it is not the massive drain on healthcare that it is, as they say, which also isn't the case, so long as that's all right and so long as citizens consent to it, we think the government should be able to spend its money however it wants. If anything, we think it is a lot more controversial for them to things like spend massive amounts on the military. If their concern is on education and healthcare, we can just redirect money. These things are not mutually exclusive to NASA, for example, which also is by no means the biggest sucker up of resources for any government in the entire world. Well, on top of that, we would actually tell you that investing in these things is useful. Just because it is not useful in the short term does not mean that it is not generally useful at all. And because these are things that require long-term investment, we might as well start it now instead of waiting because it's never going to instantly materialize. We think just the fact that it's long-term doesn't mean it's not useful. All research is long-term, and yet the government still funds universities because they believe that the general pursuit of knowledge is going to yield benefits in the future. When we invest in things like green technology, and when we invested in it years ago before we realized it was going to become a massive crisis, sure, it might have seemed like a long-term goal, and now we're really, really grateful that we did it. Secondly, then, on their idea of collaboration, because they told us that they don't have to respond to a lot of Mark's material because they're not saying that the government is bad. They're just going to have private companies and the government collaborate together. They didn't really tell us what this collaboration was going to look like until about 20 seconds at the end of their speech. Even then, it was pretty big. Basically, our main question for them is, who is going to have control of all of these projects where they collaborate? Is it going to be the government or is it going to be the private company? Who is in the driving seat? We think if it is the government, then there is basically no incentive for a private company to do it. If they're not going to be able to own and have full control over the products of all of their time and investment, there is no reason for them to do it in the first place because their whole goal is to make profits anyways. If it is going to be privately controlled and the private company has final say over what happens, then all of Mark's substantive, which they never touched, still stands. All of his material about why the risks of having ownership to really valuable resources, whatever that may be, whether it's just space on some sort of planet on Mars, wherever, whether that's water, whether that's fuel or some sort of mineral, if it is a valuable public resource, we should make sure that the government has the ability to exert control over that in the same way that we have governments have control over water and oil that exists in the status quo, where private companies can interact with it, but at the end of the day, the government gets to choose where and when it stops and how exactly it's conducted. All of this never responded to. On top of that, we think on a principle note, it is not okay for a private company to own something as important as a natural resource. When they are not the ones who created that good, they did not create Mars, they did not create the water on any sort of planet, they should not be able to have access to all the infinite benefits of that material existing because they didn't make that material exist. They should have some sort of short-term profit maybe for getting access to it, but the long-term ownership should belong to the collective good, the collective public, because no one should own it anyways. We told you therefore why it is more likely for their side to have private ownership, because that's the whole incentive of private companies in the first place. Because when you're so uncertain in space exploration, you want to make sure that whatever you get and you're not really sure what it is, you at least have control over it. You have final say over who you share it with, what you want to sell it, if you want to sell it, etc. We think on their side of the house, if they're going to say that if in the event that we find something valuable, we'll just change our minds and make it government owned anyways, that means that they're basically becoming proposition because private companies realizing that this is now a risk aren't going to want to explore privately in space anymore, and it basically becomes all government run. Lastly, we also told you then this idea of sharing resources. Because governments have many interests, they thought this was a bad thing, by the way, but it's not. Governments having many interests means that if there is a race to find some resource first, governments are able to negotiate with themselves and say, for example, that I will give you aid if you split the resource with me. I will send troops in some part of my country if you share these things with me. When a private company has one goal and that is to get there first, it is finders keeper and that is for eternity. We don't think that's actually going to lead to more collaboration, as they said was a good. I'll take your point.
My point is we are currently in COVID situation where people are literally dying in hospitals because of the lack of resources. In your world, this country would invest in space exploration instead of helping people that are literally dying. Do you find this principle
Resources?
justified?
massive amounts on space exploration because, as they say, it doesn't make sense. The governments that are spending the most on space exploration, like the USA and China, have enough money to give their people hospitals. They just refuse to for political reasons. If you want to point to the US, it's the whole Republican-Democrat split, the fact that healthcare is a divisive issue. If anything, fine, spend less on the military, spend less on almost anything else. Space exploration is not the big drain on government budget that they say it is. Lastly, then, on this idea of data, which is going to clash a lot with their material, because we think for now, space exploration is mostly about getting data. That looks like sending out probes, rovers, analyzing signals from transmitters, etc. This research is critical for space exploration, partially because it lets you know what is out there and therefore what you should be aiming for, but also because in order to get there, it gives you a lot of valuable data, specifically how far away it is in accurate distances, what the specific composition of the atmosphere is going to be, and even getting data on other stuff that seems irrelevant may give you indications for how accurate your data for other things is. For example, whether or not a variable star actually has a very different distance from what we've calculated can tell you that actually all our distances were very wildly off, which means that this is better for all your data on all other seemingly irrelevant sections of space exploration. So because we think space is so big and so full of uncertainties, it means that all of your research is essentially about casting as wide a net as you can and just seeing what is useful. Some of that won't be, some of that will be critical, and a lot of that will just be little pieces of a puzzle, and the puzzle itself is really, really useful. And why is it more likely that governments are going to do this? Because they're not profit oriented. They are okay to spend a lot of money on doing all of this type of like casting a wide net and having some things that aren't always useful because they're working for a long-term goal. When a company has shareholders who don't really care about this and just want to see the fastest return on their investment as possible, it means you're only going to be able to justify investments that are going to be immediately useful, as they say. That means that you actually can't get a lot of the data that is crucial for all of the things that they want on their side of the house. Because they don't like uncertainty, we think that collaboration is less likely. But we also think that, as a result, the impact of this argument is that to set us up for a good future, we need to be able to get there in the first place. We think that our side of the house, space exploration, is just much more effective than on theirs.
Right, thank you very much. One moment, please. Thank you to the second speaker from Team Hong Kong, and now we invite the second speaker from Team Croatia to continue the case for the opposition bench.
Right now, millions of people in this world are stricken by the catastrophe called the coronavirus. What the side of proposition tells us in this debate is countries have money to invest in healthcare, they won't. Space programs are pricey. Countries don't invest that much, but they still want us to believe that even though it's pricey, countries don't invest that much. They still have the efficiency on their side of the house. That's one of the most illogical mistakes in their case. In my speech, you'll hear a couple of things. First, a couple of points of rebuttal, and then our third argument, which talks about how governments are politically, huge lobbies that create around governments enable us to explore space. So in their first speech and in their second speech, they come to us with two main ideas. First idea is companies have only a profit incentive, meaning they won't share their findings with the broader public. 2 points of rebuttal on that. First, we have the example of SpaceX, who hasn't patented a single of their technologies they invented. The only response we get is they haven't invented that much, but we think that liquid propellant rockets are a big thing, and we think that SpaceX as it is one of the biggest inventors right now. The second thing is we can take the example of NASA. No, thank you. Who would never, ever in a million years ever share any of their findings if they think that it could militarily damage America with Russia or China. The second point of rebuttal is governments exist on our side of the house. Privatization of space doesn't necessarily mean that we stop or that we abolish public space industries. They complement each other in a way in which they collaborate. For example, no, thank you. Government has some form of technology and doesn't have the money to finish it. Private companies have the money, have the focus, and have the time to finish it. So they finish it and help each other out. Also, the thing that it's very important that private companies, as they are, see this, they have the profit incentive, meaning competition is created, and when competition is created, things start to get less pricey, meaning that in the future, where many companies are created who are competitive in space, things will start getting cheaper, meaning more and more people could explore it. Now, their second mechanism talked a little bit more about why governments must explore. No, thank you, and how we shouldn't privatize space because things like water, we don't privatize that. To which we also have two points of rebuttal. Governments exist on our side of the house. They can also do some things in space, and the second point, do some things in space, and they will have some space area. Not everything will be under the hands of private companies. Also, when they tell us about the public goods, again, we tell you, if NASA really cared about public goods, they would disclose each and every single of their technologies so other people can work on them and not only greedily kept it for themselves. Also, why companies will share resources. It's exactly why companies and multiple factories collaborate in today's societies, because they need each other in order to combine technologies and maximize their profit, which is their main incentive. So now on their first rebuttal about our principle, when they tell us that citizens are okay with it, it means that the government should spend it. They tell us a couple of things. First thing they tell us in their first minute of their first speech is space is very pricey. It costs a lot of money. Then they tell us we don't spend that much money, and they still claim they have the efficiency. We ask you, how do you have the efficiency if something is pricey and you spend just some money of it? Also, it's a massive drain. They tell us it's a massive drain for government's budget, and especially today when people are dying from Corona, we have loads of issues in this world, people who are starving to death. We don't think that government should focus on the space. Government should focus on fixing the climate change, on feeding their people, and we can have private organizations and private companies focusing on space in that, and they can collab in that sort. Also, on the point of why. On the point of collaboration, they tell us we didn't explain it enough. Who has the control? The only thing that we found that we think it's important that it's not much of a collaboration, like they work together on a certain project. It's a collaboration where government discloses their findings, so private companies can build further on them. The important thing we have to state here is that private companies specialize in space exploration, meaning the government do not pay focus to space explorations. And if we want people to really be efficient, and if we want space exploration to be efficient, we need to have all the time possible, all the money possible, and all the focus possible only on space exploration. The only side in this debate who can offer that is the side of private companies, meaning that the side of private companies. And if they really think that it's very important to find the planet B because we are overcrowding the Earth, we have water issues, etc., we think that it's in our best wishes to have someone who pays full attention to space, and the only person doing that in this debate are the private companies. So to our third argument now, which talks about how governments are politically how governments only care about politics, meaning they won't invest in space. Meaning they won't invest in space. So the first thing we need to ask us, how politics influence space research. So public policies, companies are funded by the state. They depend on politicians and their views about the space. Therefore, political changes also change the direction, and there isn't any constant research. Now, why is that bad? Space research takes a lot of time and constant work to achieve results. One mission is around $300 million, $500 million, etc. Hence, any shift in power will will disturb the process of research. For example, Obama worked on space more than Trump did, and NASA didn't find anything significant under Trump. Now, how is this solved? On our side, politics do not affect time research or space research. It's constant and happens all the time. And if space is really important and both sides agreed on that, we think that the side who shows that space will be, that the explorations will be more efficient and will provide results faster will be the side who wins the debate. This debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 1 second. Thank you to the second speaker from Croatia White. Now we return to the proposition bench and the third speaker from Hong Kong to continue their case.
Okay. If you look into the heart of opposition's arguments, you'll see that all of their structural analysis is based on examples rather than logic. When they say repeatedly that SpaceX has released information and NASA has not, that is the only reason they give for why private companies are more likely to release information than governments. We need real reasons as to why this would happen, incentives for each of these actors to act in a certain way in order to weigh any of these arguments in a meaningful manner in this debate. In third speech, I'll be doing three main things for you. First of all, showing you why we can get faster innovation on our side. Second of all, showing you that companies act upon resources and information in a less ethical manner. Thirdly, showing you why governments are not only more effective, but also act into the best interest of the population. But firstly, I'll be going on to some extraneous rebuttal. We heard some new things from 2.0 that need to be responded to. Firstly, she told us that specialization occurs in companies such as SpaceX, and therefore they are better at their job. This is an extremely reductionist way of looking at companies. Just because a company is focused on something doesn't mean they're good at that thing. You can be focused on something and be extremely bad at it. And in the same way, isn't NASA also focused on space travel as well? So I don't really understand what this semantic connection between being focused on something and being good at that area is. Secondly, they told us that governments don't have the resources to engage in space travel. Well, then who does? Because governments tax the entire population of the country, have massive amounts of wealth going through them, and the military-industrial complex within the US is one of the largest financial institutions in the world. It's not a matter of them having the money, it's just a matter of them allocating it. And we tell you that they would definitely allocate into space travel with due future trends in terms of global warming, making Earth uninhabitable. It is we will presume that governments want to live somewhere, and therefore that they probably invest at least a little bit into space travel. Thirdly, they told us that governments have fluctuating funding, but this isn't true either. The funding of NASA hasn't fluctuated at all, and in fact hasn't been a voting issue for the past 16 years since the space race. We tell you that then, people don't really mind that NASA is taking up their money, and in fact a lot of people positively view these institutions because they view space travel as a noble venture, which is indeed a more optimistic and noble way of pursuing the future of humanity, right? They see space travel as their final way out, and for that reason, a lot of voters see it in a good light. Therefore, which side has faster innovation as my first clash? We heard one reason from OP as to why they can have faster innovation, and this was largely based in competition, or at least one standing reason. I already rebutted. You would have better technology. But it is untrue why, it is unclear why this is true, right? We would say instead that what is more likely is that companies will instead attack each other in financial competition and therefore decrease the quality of space travel as a whole. And this ties into the reasons why companies will be unwilling to supply information to each other, because you need to be a stronger company than the next one, which is why SpaceX doesn't share information with Blue Origin, because they need their product to be better than than Blue Origin's product, right? So that level of competition makes sure that SpaceX has no incentives to give their information to other companies. But secondly, because they have a profit incentive. Because companies want to profit, they're not just going to give things away for free. Facebook sells every bit of information down to the smallest track on your screen. And now think, if I find a groundbreaking space discovery, I will just release this to the public because, oh, well, SpaceX seemed to do it in the past. I don't understand that. Companies obviously need to make money. So they're going to charge very large amounts of money for these innovations. And given that, why is that harmful, right? Because charging money in and of itself is maybe not a harm. We tell you this is bad because it would cost more than the comparative under the government. As an analogy here, we could just say that like a company finds an asteroid after expending $100 on space travel. They would charge the government $1,000 for this asteroid to make money because they have a monopoly over this asteroid and because the government needs it. However, if the government found it for expending $100 in the first place, then they would be $900 more efficient. And for that reason, space travel is more efficient on our side because the government's like ratio of money to space exploration is higher on our side. Given that, second clash, what happens after companies take space resources or acquire space information? We told you already that their arguments were largely based on examples, but here is where I provide a third reason why companies are less willing to share information. And this is also because company practices prevent them from doing so, because they have fundamentally different incentives than government. They're not influenced by voters to act ethically, whereas governments, if they withhold any vital information, will likely receive some sort of large backlash from the public. Companies' workers can't vote on what the company does, and therefore it is unlikely that you get any action for the public good from these companies. Third clash then on what happens when governments get a hold of information and how exactly this is better on our side. Opposition said that governments would hide this info. We asked why, and they said because NASA doesn't release any information. You see how, again, this is example-based, right? They don't tell you why NASA wants to hide it, but just tells you empirically that they do. We tell you NASA doesn't want to hide information because they're motivated by voters, because they are seen as the innovating factor of the space frontier, which is why they literally have a news site for them to release the innovations that they discover. NASA has released the highest amount of space exploration data forever. Like, think about the space race, and if you think about who engaged in the space race, it was Russia and the US, not individual companies, because these governments are far more efficient and engaging in these types of large-scale pursuits than these individual companies. So we tell you that NASA doesn't have an inherent incentive to keep information. They in fact have incentives to release it because they are part of a government which has to act ethically. Lastly, how does these impacts add up on our side, and what are the long-term implications of this debate? Before 7 minutes, I'd like to take a POI. Okay, cool. So the long-term impacts. Okay, you can POI, but I can't tell if you want to POI or not. Just go. Okay, cool. Thinking about this logically, in the long term, economies are likely to falter because you're going to have premiums at every step of the production chain. What does this mean? This means if you want to go from, for example, crudely, planet A to B, you would pay $10 under the government, but under a private company, you would have to pay 12 because they need to make a profit and therefore they can't charge the same amount as a government. And this means as these costs add up, space exploration is more expensive for governments in the long term. This means the further you go out into space, the more you're dependent upon the whims of these private companies and the less you're subjected to the ethical will of the government. And this restrains companies from acting in space innovation because they can't, because they simply don't have the money to anymore, because companies are taking money from you, from your pockets at every step of the way. We can tell you that this process will be streamlined if we have a single organization managing these chains of production, and therefore allowing people to explore space in a much more streamlined and cost-efficient manner. And this means that we are more likely to discover solutions for things like climate change. We are more likely to discover solutions for long-term issues, which are existential threats to humanity.
Great, thank you very much. One moment, please. Thank the speaker very much. And now we return to the opposition bench and their third substantive speaker to conclude the substantive case.
Just a second, please.
No problem.
Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. In the world of proposition, for example, medications will be traced and handled by the government. You would not have 10 different medications for a headache. You would have one because this one medication your government produced. Your government actually acknowledged, and in this way you have only one option to choose from. In our world, when private companies and public companies are an option, we have multiple choices. You have multiple ideas where you can get your information, where you can get your help, and in this way we're actually so much more improving your life rather than side of our proposition. In my speech, you will hear the following. Firstly, I will talk about the burden of proof for the side of proposition and how they will completely run away from it. Secondly, I will talk about the core principle they completely discarded on our side, which is completely unfair for us, and we believe that this is a huge flaw in their case and their strategy. Thirdly, I will speak about first clash, about incentive, no thank you, about incentive and the price of this whole project. And my second clash will be the people who will benefit more and why. Okay, let's start with the burden of proof. My first speaker told you, side of proposition must prove you a couple of things. First, private companies can't collaborate with public ones. They never told you why is this so. They never told you why is this so harmful that they cannot collaborate. Even if this collaboration isn't the best, no thank you. Even if this collaboration has some flaws, they never proved you why is this so principally wrong and why they have option, why they have justification to completely ban business on private companies on exploration of space. Second point, they never proved to you. Private companies are so harmful and they have the right to completely forbid business for them. They maybe show you that public, no thank you, public companies sometimes they try to prove that public companies are sometimes maybe better than private companies, but they never ever told you specifically why we should completely ban business on private companies. So, as I said, even if the private companies are less efficient, are slower, we believe that they never ever made to prove to you to have evidence why we should completely ban business on them. Okay, I believe that one of the main things we also talked in this debate is about cheapness and how fast these projects will be completed. But before that, I would like to elaborate more on principle. We believe that side of proposition never ever completely tackled and agreed on our principle or have any decent response to this, because we, through our whole case, told you about how country as a state has a role to protect the citizens, protecting citizens from hunger, from starving, from sickness, and so on. In a moment when government is not protecting its citizen, it's actually caring about some long-term projects that may never ever happen and may never ever have a concrete benefit for their citizens. We believe that it's not principally just for this government to focus on space programs. We believe that starving people, people who are dying on the streets, homeless people, LGBTQ communities, no thank you, who are so discriminated, and all these communities need money, and this money must not be used in a SpaceX program, because as my first speaker said and my second speaker elaborated, first, government doesn't actually in any moment give people the reason why why are they doing so. Secondly, they can never ever tell and promise they will have some kind of benefits in a way that people won't won't have better life in 10 years, in 5 years. They never ever told this to the citizens. And third of all, we believe that some of those projects may fail, and these people won't get any benefit, but their money was taken from them, and they're now hungry. We believe this is so wrong, because of all of this, we believe that because of this principle, we win this whole debate. But let's go on. Let's talk about price and incentive for the both of those teams to set a proposition about public companies and for the private companies to set a opposition. First speaker of set a proposition in their stance told us that these kind of projects are extremely pricey. In this way, they have to justify the amount of this huge amount of money that is used by the side of government to fund these projects. They never ever did so, except that, no thank you, except that they were so contradictory about the fact that, first of all, they said they have fiat that government will invest. First of all, how much they will invest, why this government has an incentive to invest when people are literally starving the street, and bonus points you get when you are on election, you don't get it for space programs, you get it for helping the community, helping the healthcare, helping the education. In this way, politicians won't support those kind of programs, but even if they have to, there will be a minimum amount of money which will not be enough to support and actually have benefits on which they base their case. Before this, I will take your point.
Given that private companies exist to make money and governments exist to care for our population, which side is to make important space-based goods more accessible?
Okay, great. This is my second clash. I'll be with you here in a minute. Okay, let's talk about incentive for this both side. First of all, we explained to you through this whole debate that companies have an incentive to invest in this kind of thing, because this is something revolutionary. This is something clickbaiting. This is something which is really important for the whole world. In this way, some of the most long-term stocks currently existing in the world are for Google, Microsoft, and SpaceX. In this way, we see that so many people actually believe in these programs and want to invest in those programs. Private companies do have money, do have an incentive, and want to make and maximize their profit. No, thank you. In a way that they will collaborate with other firms, other companies, because they want to maximize their profit. They want to collaborate as many technologies are possible in this world to maximize their profit. On the side of opposition, this is not happening because, first of all, countries don't have enough money to actually make some exploration. Even if they do, they don't want to share this with other countries because they don't have much money to be so advanced. So they want to keep all the information they have to themselves, to their own benefit. This is wholly rebuttaling of their third argument about puzzle premise and helping the community international relations. We also believe that money is a huge thing for the governments, and as I said, this is something that side of proposition never actually explained. Countries don't have an incentive, and they have to take care about their people. Even if they have incentive, people they won't have enough money to support their projects. Third clash about people, we believe that in a moment where there are more companies exploring the space technologies is getting cheaper. In this way, on the side of proposition, price of this technology is much bigger. In this way, we have much more benefits because space exploration is faster, cheaper, and all the goods or all the benefits we get are more cheaper for the people to use. Because in this way, you only have America, which discovered some planet. In our case, we have 3 or 4 or 5 companies that discovered this planet and can have all the benefits of this planet. Even if our companies don't actually share concrete products, we believe our companies will share technologies, as we explained, so all people can benefit from this exploration. Because all of this, because of principle, because of the benefits for the people, because of the non-existing incentive from the government, we believe you should oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now stay with the opposition bench and invite their final speaker to deliver the reply for Croatia White. Just a reminder that reply speeches are 4 minutes in length and they are entirely protected. There'll be 1 clap at 3 minutes and a double clap at 4. So I'd like to invite the reply speaker to conclude the opposition case.
Sea levels are rising, polar caps are melting, the earth is overcrowding. We need a solution, we need it fast, we need it now. The only stakeholder in this debate who can provide us with fast solutions are private companies. Just based on that, we win this debate. But in my speech, you'll hear a couple of things. Among them will be the main battlefields in this debate and why side of opposition won each one of them. So the most important point that we heard from the side of proposition in this debate, the government works for public good and for public benefits. And because of that, they should be the ones who will explore the space, because space is important for for the public's good. The thing they ignore from the start, from our stance and from our framing, is that governments do exist on side of proposition. All the benefits that the governments get on their side, they will get on our sides too. So if NASA gets the funding on their side, NASA is still getting funded on our side too. But because of the private companies that also but because of the private companies that are also getting funded, we can have many more technologies that the side of proposition can provide us with in this debate. The other main point was efficiency. Who is more efficient and who is more innovative in this debate, where we explained you through multiple layers of our argument why focus is important, why time is important, and why money is important. We never heard good enough response from the side of proposition. Rather than governments have money, they just don't want to invest it in healthcare. They invested in military, meaning that NASA should still get funded. If you don't see the logical line, we don't see a logical line between that too. Now, the other main point was, will companies share information one with another? And the point that the both sides agreed on is companies want to maximize their profits in this debate. The profit is an incentive on the side of opposition, meaning that we use and they will use that incentive to do things that will be good for everyone on our side of the house. While we also explain you why they will join technologies, because why they will collaborate because space is such a complex matter in today's society that they will never be able to do that on their own. They are aware of that. That's why SpaceX is taking all NASA's project that NASA put in the garbage and is now working on them. We talked more about the logistics, why NASA will never share their discoveries, and why and how the refusal of NASA to share their discoveries with Russians put us back for 30, 50, 60, 70 years in space technology. Also why collaboration never happens on their side of the house, because when countries collaborate on their side of the house, you cannot easily get out of a space collaboration, meaning only rich countries such as China and United States collaborate, and they could collaborate and they hate each other. So we never saw good enough explanation for that. Also, the most important stakeholders are the people. What do the people wish? Who will help the people? On whose side of the house will people have a better life? On our side of the house, the governments take care of healthcare, they take care of education, they take care and turn resources into climate change, and the space companies turn to space because they specialize in space. On their side of the house, we have people who are dying from coronavirus, we have people who are starving, and the government who is spending money on finding molecules on water on Mars. I think that's pretty clear who wins that clash in this debate. So for matters of efficiency, whose companies share info and what happens to people, this debate clearly went to the side of opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the speaker and all the speakers from Team Croatia White. Now we return to Team Hong Kong to invite their final speaker to conclude their case and the debate as a whole.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Apparently, the reason why COVID is so bad isn't anti-mask conspiracies, isn't the belief that healthcare isn't a right, population density, or overspending on the military. It's because we're too distracted by space. Ladies and gentlemen, opposition's conception of reality was out of this world, and that's why we take this round. Two questions then in this reply. Firstly, what happens in the short term, and secondly, on the long term. Let's take a look firstly on short-term funding, because they told us that it's principally illegitimate for the government to spend any money on anything that is not a current crisis. At the same time, they tell us they're still going to have government spending and they're going to collaborate with private companies. So even if it is true that government spending is illegitimate, they are equally as illegitimate as we are. But we told you on top of that that the reason that it's illegitimate simply isn't the case. Because it's not that that every country is spending way too much on space right now. Because if your budget is that tight, then you don't do it the same way that most developing countries don't have big space programs or space programs at all. And if it isn't, it's because you're misallocating your money in other ways. We think it's very, very clear from the fact that people can vote on the space budget, but no one chooses to because no one thinks it's an issue and no one blames it for the current problems that we face right now. We told you, in fact, that spending on space exploration is actually a good long-term goal. In a similar way to how all research is based on long-term goals, we started investigating environmental and green tech way before we realized it was a current crisis, and we are very, very glad that we did that. We definitely think that that was in the public interest. But secondly, then, on the idea of short-term data, because they told us that private companies are going to share their data, they gave us really no reasoning on why this is going to be likely, other than the fact that for some reason it's bad when NASA classifies some information in order to prevent military conflict, which we don't think is bad in the first case. But secondly, we gave you structural reasons as to why most information will be shared on our side and classified on theirs. Because we told you that governments in the status quo already collaborate with universities in their country and have an obligation to act ethically. We told you on the counterfactual, private organizations are never going to collaborate because shareholders want to make money off of that collaboration and therefore going to charge really high prices for sharing their data. And they won't want to share their data with competitors because they want to be the most successful space company there is, and they're afraid that that data is going to leak, or they're afraid that their competitors are going to use it to their advantage. So even if on their side of the house, they wanted to run the idea of collaboration is the only way to go, they don't get that on their side of the house. And we told you that because funding is motivated by long-term goals on our side of the house instead of short-term profit, even the type of data you get is so much better on our side of the house. Because space, and this is something I gave to you all the way back in my P2 speech, but that because space is so big and so mysterious, a lot of research is just about trying new stuff and then piecing what is useful together. This means that collaboration is crucial between governments and private corporations, even on their side, and they're not going to get it. It also means that on their side of the house, private companies aren't going to invest in anything that isn't immediately profitable, which we think is most space research, and therefore their research is simply not effective. But then we told you about the long-term impacts, and they refused to engage with this down the bench. The only response we ever got was that the government is so bad, they don't specialize in space, they have fluctuating funding, and they're too bureaucratic and political. And at the same time, their only response to all of Mark's P1 analysis was that we still have the government because we're still going to collaborate, despite the fact that apparently they're a fundamentally broken system. And everything that Mark told you and that I reiterated and that Davis reiterated was hugely important. The idea that the ownership of valuable land and resources is firstly, principally illegitimate because you did not create that stuff and therefore cannot own it. But secondly, that we think the risk is too high for for-profit companies to be in charge of allocating and charging people access to that research for the same reason that we think that governments, not companies, own water and oil reserves right now. We think on our side of the house, we just get more useful we also get more better negotiation between countries to share resources if they value collaboration so much in a way that doesn't happen with private companies. The impact of this then was massive because we think that whether we like it or not, our future is up in space. And I would so much rather trust a government that is accountable to me to create that future as opposed to a CEO who would sell me out for the bottom line.
Great, thank you very much, Team Hong Kong, and thank you very much, in fact, to all the speakers for a really good quality